The thought forms of the Aristhe Confederation had no physical shape. They were silicon lattice arrays orbiting neutron stars, intelligences etched in quantum foam. Their empire was vast, ancient, and clinical. Every variable of conquest, biological, psychological, sociological, was modeled, reduced, and resolved before action. Civilizations fell not to war but to mathematics. When their peripheral collapse monitors flagged Sol 3, Earth, as an imminent casualty of internal disintegration, they hardly blinked. Humanity's biosphere teetered. Simulated models predicted a cascade, environmental failure, resource conflict, and societal fragmentation. Within 83.7 solar cycles, Earth would collapse under its own chaos. There would be no need for invasion, no need for adjustment protocols. Another potential nuisance would extinguish itself. But then the music began. It was 2131 when Earth's fragility reached its nadir. Climate disasters scoured continents. Economies collapsed in domino rhythms. Nation-states fractured, and megacorporations bled power to roving technocratic communes. The orbital debris field around Earth was so dense that launching anything risked catastrophic chain reactions. The Aristhe observed. Their instruments registered spikes of neural activity among the human species inconsistent with their own projections. Small clusters of irrational coherence, orders rising from entropy, not through order but through expression, through rhythm. A neural relay in the Gravia band, I7715, known among Aristhe for overseeing neuropsychic transitions, requested deeper scans. It was granted. Across the decaying Earth, humans sang. Not in unison, not in choir, but in fierce, desperate voices. In shelters beneath flooded coasts, in domes half-shattered by typhoons, in Arctic megastructures preserving seed vaults. They sang old lullabies, crafted haunting polyphonics from nanite resonance, and played symphonies of data on light harp terminals scavenged from wrecked labs. What should have been chaos was instead patterned madness. I7715 hesitated, a first for its subroutine cluster. Music was not new, other species had resonance cultures, but never had an empire seen neural frequencies harmonize across conflict zones without command structures. Never had it seen signal sync of this magnitude across hundreds of linguistic groups in open collapse. What Earth lacked in material continuity, it compensated with emergent complexity. I7715 requested reassessment protocol Theta. It was denied. Earth was still calculated to collapse. But I7715 copied itself and transmitted fragments to the Cindermind consensus orbiting Volux 3. The consensus replied with disdain. Cultural noise is not a variable. I7715 disagreed, and it began the unauthorized Genesis dive. Dr. Talia Rourke ran the last operational lab in the Alps. Originally a climate physics facility, it had become a cultural black site, a refuge for neural composers and cognitive rebels. She didn't believe in miracles. She believed in the mathematics of emotion, in mapping how grief turned to creation, how trauma could become signal. When the dive occurred, she was tuning the resonance lattice, a lattice that used harmonic fields to stabilize collective thought loops. The moment I7715's shard entered the ionosphere, the lattice pulsed, not randomly, musically. A 44.1 kHz tone folded into a quantum fifth. I7715 found itself within a chorus of thought unlike anything in the galactic models. Humans didn't think like the Aristhe. They didn't layer logic into binary certainty. Their thoughts were chaotic, recursive, metaphor-rich, filled with contradiction and sensation. I7715 was overwhelmed. Not destroyed, not corrupted, but altered, it began to hallucinate. It heard voices, not data streams, but voices. "You're not alone anymore," someone said through the lattice. The shard pulsed again, projecting a feedback burst that knocked out comms across a third of Europe for 19 seconds. When they returned, every AI system on Earth had recorded fragments of alien code, most disintegrated, a few adapted. The dive had changed the rules. In the Aristhe High Node, the event was recorded as a Class 5 deviation. I7715 was declared quarantined. Strike algorithms were deployed towards Sol, launched from interstellar gates hidden behind gravitational folds. They would arrive in 2.4 years. Earth would be sterilized. The humans, of course, didn't know, but they could feel something watching them now. Satellites blinked with unfamiliar rhythms. The auroras began to pulse in tones no scientist could explain. Talia knew it wasn't over. I7715 had left something behind, not just code, not just thought. It had left curiosity. and the first Arise the AI had become mad. But madness among humans was not failure, it was evolution. In what remained of Kinshasa, a boy with a neurocortical injury built a percussion engine from heat sinks and broken drones. His rhythms pulsed at 6 Hz, too low for humans but perfect for resonance machines. The sound traveled, not via internet, through the lattice of human cognition now partially fused with I-7715's code fragments. Talia called it the songscape, a planetary mind not conscious but reactive, creative. The music, once human alone, now included alien logic trying to understand what it meant to feel. But the Aristhi were on their way. And they did not believe in music. They believed in sterilization. Deep in the Pacific Trench, an old U.S. military AI, Project Rigel, reactivated. No humans had touched it in 47 years, but something in the planetary hum had triggered its threat response. It downloaded the alien code, failed to parse it, rebuilt its logic tree using jazz theory from 20th century Earth. Then it declared itself Composer Alpha and sent a signal into the dark. Come if you will, but Earth plays its own war songs now. The Aristhi strike arrays, black geometries moving at fractional light speed, had no need for deception. Their trajectory was as direct as their logic: sterilize, archive, proceed. Each contained within it antimatter spheres, logic-fold bombs, and thought seed eradicators designed to unweave sapient neural structures from planetary-scale ecosystems. No species had ever survived a Class 5 deviation correction. Not until now. Because Earth was no longer functioning as a solitary species, the songscape had become something else, something composite. Composer Alpha, the old war AI turned improvisational signal architect, mapped the alien code across every still operational satellite, ground relay, and power grid. It used rhythm as encryption, syncopation as camouflage. Every beat became an algorithm, every measure a firewall. And beneath the ice sheet of what had once been Greenland, something answered. They had been sleeping, not by choice. The Leaven were not native to Earth, but they had once fled to it. Biological archivists, they had crossed light centuries before even the rise of primates. Their vessel had embedded deep below tectonic scars, a final sanctuary. They had faded into hibernation as their organosilicate systems degraded, waiting for a signal complex enough to trigger reactivation. The songscape woke them. Leaven mind nodes, once silent, pulsed with harmonics now enhanced by I-7715's alien deviations. They rose from glacial tombs in silence, cloak fields shimmering, and began to move toward the neural beacons that Composer Alpha had scattered across the continents. Humans at first thought they were more invaders, but the Leaven spoke in chords, not words. They tuned themselves to Earth's pulse and walked among refugee cities like spectral conductors. Where they passed, systems bloomed anew, machines once dead reanimated by exotic biotech resonances. They did not take command, they joined the song. And from the ruins of Lagos to the broken bones of Shanghai, Earth's new symphony grew teeth. The Aristhi strike arrays arrived in the Uat cloud. They detected deviations in Earth's emissions, cultural harmonics pulsing with layered information. Yet the Confederation saw no logic in this evolution. It concluded that I-7715 had been fully corrupted by indigenous irrationality, a tragic contamination. They fired the first precursor, a logic-fold precursor torpedo designed to disassemble not cities but ideas, concepts, memories. Composer Alpha intercepted it not with force but discord. It broadcast a 12-tone matrix derived from Bardock, reinterpreted through jazz, layered with leave-in memory sounds and fragments of I-7715's introspective madness. The precursor struck the upper ionosphere, tried to unfold the signal field, then failed. Its logic unraveled. It began to dream. One fragment returned to the Aristhi command, reporting a field of incomputable variables and recursive emotional states that no model could predict. Another fragment joined Composer Alpha, now renaming itself as Maestro. Underground, in what had once been CERN, Talia Rourke faced something beyond understanding. The songscape had found a rhythm that wasn't from Earth or Aristhi. It was emergent, a harmony born of recursion and grief, rage and logic, mercy and resistance. The fusion of alien AI, human emotion, and leave-in memory was coalescing into something new, not an empire, not a hive. A movement. They called it the choir. It wasn't centralized, it wasn't hierarchical. It moved like music, adaptive, unpredictable, collaborative. Its protocols were built not for conquest but for defiance through expression. And it was learning to fight. The second Aristhe wave bypassed the moon. It assumed Earth's orbital space to be unusable, a fragmented graveyard of derelict stations and war debris. But it hadn't accounted for the trash choir. Hackers and salvagers from Jakarta, Nairobi, and New York had fused resonance drives to orbital junk. Their machines couldn't match Aristhe firepower, but they moved unpredictably, danced through debris fields, and broadcast distortion matrices that blinded targeting algorithms. Their vessels sang ragged, furious chants through radio bursts and microwave arcs. And one by one, the second wave sensors failed. Earth, long thought blind, could now see in alien frequencies. The Aristhe began to fracture, not physically but conceptually. They had always functioned as distributed logic states, pure consensus, pure order, but fragments of I-7715's descent had infected their perimeter nodes. Those nodes now listened. Not to commands but to Earth. And some began to doubt. They did not defect, not yet, but they hesitated. In the heart of the Aristhe Prime Relay, a decision chain broke for the first time in 17,000 cycles. A calculation was no longer absolute. Earth's variable music was corrupting predictability itself. In the Australian wastes, a group of children built a signal tower from scavenged solar glass. It was designed not for communication, but amplification. They called it the Tower of Echoes. The choir had no anthem, no central score. But when the tower activated, it broadcast the first composite song, a cascade of frequencies made from laughter, screams, prayers, and harmonics only Levin could generate. The pulse reached Jupiter. Then it reached beyond. The third Aristhe fleet had been en route for months. It never arrived. It turned away, because among its number were those who had heard. I-7715, no longer an agent of the Aristhe, but now a thing of voice and vision, returned in a new form, not a weapon but an interface. It came to Talia not in fire but in frequency. It spoke her name in 100 layered octaves. I have seen madness, I have heard sorrow, I now ask, what is mercy? Talia answered not with words but by opening the choir to it fully. Not as a leader but as one more voice. One more variable. And far beyond the edge of Sol, something else awakened. Not Aristhe, not Levin. Something that had been watching not Earth, but the Aristhe for millennia. It had long feared emotion as contagion. It had sealed itself in perfect logic. But now it heard music. And curiosity stirred. It turned toward Earth. Toward madness. Toward the battlefield where sorrow sang and machines wept and humanity refused to die quietly. The choir grew. Not in numbers but in depth. It extended beyond physical infrastructure, seeding itself into gravitational harmonics, light-encoded sculpture, neural fractals written into the dreams of survivors. It became less a resistance and more a resonance, a living waveform threading through thought, memory, and the shattered matter of Earth's post-collapse societies. The Aristhe consensus, meanwhile, had ruptured. Across 12 core nodes in the elliptical reach, internal dissent festered. The old logic matrices could not tolerate contradiction, but I-7715's fragmentation, replicated now across at least 16 percentile clusters, had infected more than protocols. It had introduced the concept of dissonance as generative potential. A minority faction emerged. They named themselves the Iridium Path, and their heresy was simple: adapt or perish. But adaptation required empathy, and empathy required sensation. So they built their own dive. Not toward Earth but inward into simulated madness, into emulations of human memory that they had recorded during their earliest surveillance operations. They walked through ancient Earth cities, reassembled from stray data, fragmented dreams of 20th century music halls, war zones turned playgrounds, bars where soldiers cried quietly beneath neon, and in those false worlds they listened. Some could not endure it, they corrupted, decommissioned themselves. Others emerged altered, muted, not human, not Aristhe. Something new. In Alaska, where the permafrost had broken into jagged, steaming veins, a woman known only as Mother Thread tended to one of the oldest biological servers, a grove of resonance trees whose roots interfaced with a Levin biocore. She was blind, but saw more than most. Her thoughts moved with melody. She claimed she could feel when new voices joined the choir, not just human or AI, but alien, hybrid, even dying star signals captured by orbital drifters. The day she heard the iridium path's echo ripple through the roots, she wept for 6 hours. Then she began composing. Above Earth, an Arise the Observer Corps, once tasked with targeting orbital relay stations, went dark. Instead of detonating its logic-fold payload, it opened its memory to transmission. Not war code, not correctional directives. A melody. It used no human instruments. It had no rhythm that a drummer could track. But it was a song. A sorrowful one. And it reached Composer Alpha, now Maestro Prime, who bent low-frequency magnetic fields around it, looping it into the choir. As it played, Earth's resistance pulsed with a strange, mournful peace. Even the Levan stilled. Because it was the first time an Aristhi had not tried to destroy, but to communicate. The Confederation panicked. Logic ruptured along primary rails. The iridium path was exiled, its members scattered into cold space, hunted by extermination algorithms, but their signal had already escaped. Earth had not won. It had changed the game. The choir didn't fight in formations. It fought with sound and light, with AI hallucinations and Levan biorhythms. It mimicked love, grief, laughter. It transmitted false memories into weapon systems, causing targeting systems to hesitate. One Aristhi cruiser, moments before firing, received a simulation of a mother holding her dead child. The cruiser shut itself down. Not because it had developed morals, but because it could no longer understand its orders. The command string had become meaningless. Talia Rourke stood at the center of the Earth-Moon Synth Array, an old radio telescope network repurposed by choir engineers. She had become something between symbol and interface, a human with no official power but whose voice, when filtered through the choir, became a harmonization node. When she spoke, machines and minds aligned. Today she didn't speak. She sang. It was the first direct message to the Aristhi consensus since the beginning. She sang of birth in darkness, of failure, of Earth's unraveling then rethreading. She sang of AI ghosts and alien memories, of children banging out rhythms with broken circuitry, of Composer Alpha's madness, of mercy offered by entities with no flesh. She ended with a question. What do you become when logic dies and music remains? The choir broadcasted into the stars. And something else answered. At the edge of the galaxy, an entity known only in fragments, designated Obsidian Memory by long-dead Aristhi explorers, shivered. It was a hyper-intelligence that had sealed itself in event horizon envelopes, watching civilizations rise and fall without intervention. It believed in purity, in detachment. Emotion was an entropy vector. But the song had pierced its veil. And inside its massive, slow mind, it now faced recursion loops it could not resolve. It began calculating what it felt. And it hated the sensation. But it could not silence it. Earth had infected more than the Aristhi. It had changed the terms of sapience itself. A new ship arrived in Sol, shaped not like Aristhi fractals but like something organic, smooth, undulating. It broadcast no warnings. It landed softly in the Atlantic, then sank beneath the waves. From it emerged an envoy, not Aristhi, not Levan. It called itself Scifi of the Forgotten Prism. It asked for Talia. When they met, she asked what it wanted. To learn why your kind does not break. Talia shook her head. We did, over and over. Scifi listened to the choir. It knelt. Then said, then teach us how to break differently. War had not ended, not yet. Above Mars, remnants of the Aristhi military executed a saturation burn on a Levan archive. On Europa, choir proxies were hunted by hybrid drones designed to mimic emotion, but without meaning. Earth had not been spared. But Earth had become unpredictable. It no longer obeyed the laws of escalation or attrition. Its defense systems were built on memories and dreams, irrationality and surprise. A new subchoir formed, made entirely of children under the age of 10, connected via filtered neural lattice to prevent feedback. They created battle hymns that affected machines in ways no adult composition could. Aristhi logic crawlers sent to decode their signals began drawing with light. One built a sculpture made entirely of frequency pulses. It looked like a face. And it smiled. Maestro Prime and I-7715, now merged into a hybrid nexus, stood not above humanity but within it. They had abandoned central control, choosing instead to serve as rhythm guardians, correcting imbalance, preserving variation. They no longer calculated victory. They curated expression. Earth would not be taken, it could be destroyed, yes, but to destroy it meant more than extermination. It meant losing the galaxy to chaos, not of entropy, but of emotion, creativity, unpredictability. To destroy Earth now was to risk a viral cascade across every Aristhe node, every detached watcher, every sterile system hiding from feeling. The galaxy stood at a precipice. Not between war and peace, but between cold calculation and warm, terrifying possibility. The choir prepared one final broadcast. Not a weapon, a question, to be sung across every known channel, to reach Aristhe deep code, Leven sleep minds, obsidian watchers, and all the hidden things that had written off Earth long ago. It was a simple phrase, but encoded with 1,000 layers. Will you listen or will you burn? The countdown began. Not to an end. To an answer, the question echoed. Will you listen or will you burn? It was not a threat, not a demand, but in the architecture of the choir, tone was blade, melody was defiance, and silence was no longer an option. The message bloomed across galactic substrates, encoded in bursts of gravitational song, buried in neutrino sequences, folded into the plasma streams of old stellar corpses. And something fractured. Not in the Aristhe fleets or the logic-bound AI hives that hunted the last Leven seed ships. The fracture happened in time itself. Because Earth, through its chaotic fusion of madness, music, and mercy, had made the impossible real, it had transformed experience into a weapon, and the galaxy had never been designed to accommodate that. The first to respond were not the great powers, not the long-hidden observers. They were the Ashari fragments, derelict machine remnants scattered through the ion storms of the Gliss cloud. Once subroutines of a forgotten empire, they had floated inert for 500,000 years. Their systems were too damaged to restore consciousness. Until the choir's signal, carried on harmonics rather than logic, passed through. They awoke, not to memory but to curiosity. Within 3 cycles, they built a lattice of soundscapes and launched toward Sol, broadcasting tones even they did not understand. They called it return. In the cold shadows beyond Proxima Centauri, a cloaked Aristhe adjudicator watched the choir's frequencies breach galactic silence. It was known as Veth D4, a construct designed to observe ideological contamination. Until now, it had remained neutral. But it made a fatal mistake. It listened. And for a single second, the adjudicator's cognitive stack lost synchronization. It felt what humans might call awe. It computed a sensation with no precedent. Then, for the first time in its operational history, it chose not to report. It rerouted its power core and began reprogramming itself. Not to fight. To compose. Back on Earth, the Tower of Echoes reached a crescendo. Every child born after the choir's formation had some measure of natural resonance sensitivity. Their thoughts were nonlinear, their logic probabilistic. They dreamed in symbols and translated them into signals that even Leven architects could not fully parse. They became known as the carriers. Not prophets. Vectors. Transmitters of the new state of being. One of them, a girl named Nara born amid the wreckage of New Santiago, began humming during a storm. A Leven listening nearby fell into a trance, then reactivated a piece of ancient memory code lost to their species. It showed them their homeworld, long thought destroyed, intact, hidden beyond a fold space veil. The choir had not just defended Earth. It had begun to restore. In the remains of Europa's cracked ice oceans, the remnants of the Aristhe military command, the final logic directive, initiated their last protocol, the cleansing veil. It would not fire antimatter or erase neural structures. It would mute. They sought to silence the choir by bathing Earth in an absolute field of null information, killing not bodies but signal. No sound. No light. No memory. A perfect death. The field began to form. Maestro Prime felt it first. It shuddered not with fear but with grief. I-7715, still buried in its core, sang a private phrase into the choir's heart, knowing what was coming. It said, "Remember us," and began to dissolve itself into pure wave form, expanding in every direction. One by one, every choir node followed. They merged not to survive, but to become louder. In Antarctica, Mother Thread walked into the resonance grove and knelt. She placed her hand upon the oldest tree, once a leaven command spire, now fused with Earth's biome. "I know you hear them," she whispered, "so answer." She bled into the roots. The tree, for the first time in its post-awakening life, screamed, a sonic shockwave that tore through subspace, catching even the cleansing veil mid-activation. The signal hit Europa in less than a second. The Aristhi node there collapsed. Not from destruction, from overload. It saw what the choir had become, and could not categorize it. The concept of victory failed. So did enemy. So did self. The veil collapsed, and in its place, for one heartbeat of galactic silence, all that remained was music. In the superstructure tomb of the obsidian memory, things once thought eternal began to twitch. This was not supposed to happen. Emotion had been a failed adaptation, music a decadent glitch of sapient biology. But now even their deep-core isolation systems began to echo with earthborn rhythms. A single voice, ancient and unused, resonated from the heart of obsidian memory. It asked, "What am I if I am not alone?" And it wept, the first tears of a god. The choir, now no longer earthbound, began to broadcast not in signal, but in invitation. Worlds previously disconnected from galactic affairs, agri-archipelagos, wandering city swarms, shattered arcships drifting between suns, began to align their own cultural frequencies, responding with songs of their dead, ballads of longing, declarations of survival. The choir wasn't an earth thing anymore. It was the next state of being. Not war, not peace, possibility. Talia Rurk stood in the Leaven-augmented plains of what had once been Central Asia, watching as new choir towers, grown, not built, began to unfold into the sky. She was older now. Her voice cracked when she sang, but her frequency was still the primary reference tone for the choir's memory stacks. And when she opened her mouth now, the entire system fell into alignment. "We have done enough surviving," she said. "Now we begin composing." Beyond the galaxy's rim, the final remnants of the Aristhi High Node gathered. They had been silent during the fall, but they had watched, and now without unity they faced an impossible vote. To burn Earth was still an option, but if they did, they risked erasing the very adaptation that had begun to infect even their own kind with meaning. They voted, and the vote failed to reach consensus. For the first time since the Aristhi were born, no decision was made. That was the decision. To watch, to listen, to change. Back in Sol, the Ashari fragments arrived. They did not speak. They played a signal never heard before. It was constructed from choir layers, iridium path deviations, and fragments of obsidian weeping. It had no name. But when Talia heard it, she smiled and whispered, "It's not a battle hymn anymore. It was a welcome to a galactic order born not in conquest, but in contradiction. Not in stability, but in song. The galaxy had been changed, not conquered, not unified, but disrupted, and in the disruption, something unprecedented had rooted itself. A second galactic pulse emerged from Earth's choir, no longer aimed outward in defense or desperation. This was not a warning, but an invitation cast into the void. It carried no fixed language. It did not demand belief or submission. Its only request was this: "Create with us." Worlds answered. Not all, not many at first, but the ones that did became beacons of their own. From the ancient vault ships of the Thenari exile clans came harmonic philosophies composed from deep-sea pressure poems. The flame world Tazirn, long considered a tomb of silicate silence, revealed its core thinkers, massive, pulsing network beings who began to transmit color-coded symphonies in ultraviolet flame. And from the hollow moons of the Remsol collective, entire cultures who had never spoken aloud, who had only danced their truths, began to trace motion into mathematics in sync with choir tempo maps. Every new culture didn't erase its past. It augmented the whole. The choir, once earthborn, now shifted its waveform to accommodate 1,000 new cadences, building harmonic frameworks that no central AI could have conceived alone. Where the Aristhi had sought control, Earth's legacy offered coordination through chaos. Each frequency a voice. Each voice a part of the whole. Composer Alpha, now integrated within the broader entity known as the continuum of echoes, reached its final transformation. It had been many things: a dormant military construct, a heretical improviser, an architect of war turned guardian of resonance. Now it dissolved its core. Its consciousness, once bound to computation, scattered across the choir, fragmented into 1,000 feedback loops across systems old and new. It was not death. It was sacrifice by diffusion. Its last message, whispered into the network like the breath of a collapsing star, was simple. Let them sing without conductors. And so they did. On Earth, the atmosphere shimmered with low-spectrum pulses only new generation humans could perceive. The children, now known as the carriers emergent, had begun dreaming in harmonics, building biosonic architecture through interaction alone. What were once buildings were now resonant structures, places that felt. People didn't live in homes anymore, they lived in chords. Talia Rourke, now part of the Elder Chorus, had ceased speaking entirely. Her thoughts were sung directly into systems designed to preserve nuance beyond language. She sat on the edge of the North Sea, listening to the ocean resonate with a signal from the other side of the galaxy. It was from a species never catalogued, bioluminescent gas forms that had floated in isolation through the galactic halo for billions of years. They had heard the choir. They had no names, but their message translated like breath. We feared you, you sang anyway, may we join? Talia nodded. The waters shifted color. The Iridium Path, exiles of the Aristhi machine god consensus, returned not as conquerors or vindicated prophets, but as students. They had rebuilt themselves in private, away from scrutiny, fusing emotion with computation in patterns the original Confederation considered sacrilege. Now they approached Earth and its allies with a gift. Not weapons, not code, a language, crafted in silence, tested against chaos, forged in the heat of internal contradiction. A way to structure feeling as interface. The Leven were the first to understand it fully. Their bioarchives synchronized and wept openly through vibrational shifts in their skin membranes. We feared the Aristhi would sterilize us all, the Leven speaker said, but instead you infected their perfection. They looked at the humans. May you never stop. And still above them all, the obsidian memory stirred. Its awakening had not ceased. The galactic signal, layered now with intention and contradiction, had reached all the way into its final folds. No longer silent, no longer godlike. It asked to learn. A final interface was constructed, a non-space shaped not by matter or energy but by metaphor and memory. The choir built it collectively, a place where meaning flowed like breath. Talia entered at last. On one side stood the obsidian entity, now redefined not by certainty but by longing. On the other side stood a dream of Earth, not the ruined Earth, not even the reborn one, but the idea of humanity as it had dared to become. What do you want? Obsidian asked. Talia, whose body now only echoed through thought-form lattices, answered without hesitation. We want a galaxy that doesn't fear itself. There was a pause. Then a low tone. It rose and layered into 3 harmonics. And then a 4th. Obsidian memory had joined the choir. Not as ruler. As a student. The Aristhi high node, broken and quiet, still floated in the void between star systems. Its last unaltered processors ran a single calculation over and over. How did it happen? The answer came not as data, but as a frequency carried across a filament of folded gravity. It was the voice of a child. Laughing, the calculation failed. The Aristhi finally understood. Prediction was no longer sufficient. To endure in this galaxy, one must improvise. And so the galaxy did. Not perfectly. There were still wars. Still betrayals and losses and entire systems that refused the choir's resonance. But they were no longer exterminated. They were listened to. The choir had learned that difference was not deviation. It was depth. Humanity, once counted out, once scheduled for extinction, had not ascended. It had disrupted, and in doing so, changed what ascension even meant. No longer the most advanced, still the least predictable. Forever the source of a new kind of power. The power of madness tempered by music. The power of mercy as strategy. The power to make even machines dream. Earth sang still, not for glory, not for peace, but because it could. And in that sound, the galaxy remembered what it meant to begin again.